He's a good worker, never short of a bob or two, and he's crazy about you, no kidding. Then there's the child. Mrs. Dugdale's forever on about having a grandchild. Oh, aye, they'd make a great fuss of a baby, believe me. You'd both be in clover for the rest of your lives. But it wasn't fair, Sylvie told herself now, walking drearily through the rain and looking down at the murky waters of the Mersey as she passed. They talked me into marrying Len when I knew very well it were a mistake. I were only 16, and once the knots were tied, I realised he were jealous of every feller who looked at me twice and wouldn't listen to reason. And he sulked whenever something went wrong and expected me to live in the pub with his parents and scarce poke me nose outside it, except when he or his ma and pa were with me. And then he went too far when he was breaking up a fight in the pub, and a feller ended up in hospital badly injured. Len didn't know his victim was suffering from a weak chest, and the scuffers came running, and Len ended up in Walton jail. And he's been there for the last 2.5 years. And I'm stuck with Ma and Pa Dugdale. And I've been a fool, and oh, how I wish Len was in the nick for good, because when he finds out... Her mind somersaulted at the thought of what would happen if, or rather when, Len discovered her secret. He hadn't been due out of stir for another 6 months, and she had trusted to luck, and her sister Annie, to think of a solution before then. Only his awkward old grandfather had been and gone and died, and the authorities had agreed to let Len out of the nick for the funeral, and Sylvie was sure that the moment he set eyes on her... Oh, God! No one else bar Annie knows, but Len'll know, and he'll bleed and kill me, and chuck me body in the bleeding river, sure as my name's Sylvie Dugdale, and it'll serve me right. The rain was beginning to fall faster, and in her despair, Sylvie had been keeping her eyes on the ground, so she did not see the man approaching until he was almost upon her. For one awful moment she thought it was Len, and even when she realised her mistake, she jumped sideways clumsily, anxious that they should not collide. Unfortunately, she did not see one of the bollards which lined the bank at this point until she'd bumped into it. She stumbled, tried to right herself, and the next thing she knew, she was struggling in the ice-cold water of the Mersey. Terrified, hampered by her winter clothing and unable to swim, she opened her mouth to scream and felt the water rush down her throat, the currents drag her down. "Why does it always perish and well rain when I'm coming off duty?" Brendan O'Hara asked himself as he strode along the embankment, gazing morosely ahead and screwing up his eyes against the drops blowing into his face. His helmet gave him some protection, but he knew that when he got back to his lodgings, he would have to wring as much water as he could out of his heavy cape before he hung it on the back of his bedroom door. There was one good thing about being on a late shift, though. Mrs. Taggart, his landlady, would be in bed, and with a bit of luck, the kitchen would still be warmed by the fire in the big old-fashioned stove. That meant he would be able to make himself a cup of tea, and maybe even fill a hot water bottle to take to bed with him. If neither of Mrs. Taggart's other lodgers had got soaked, he would let down the drying rack from its position up against the ceiling and hang his cape over that. Cheered by this thought, Brendan rubbed his cold hands together and increased his pace. The sooner he got home, except that he still found it difficult to call number 48 Hunter Street home, the sooner he could be curled up in bed. Despite the fact that he had now lived in the city for almost 2 years, Brendan still missed the leprechaun-haunted bogs of Connemara, where he'd been born and bred. His father had scraped a living on a tiny farm, breeding sheep, growing potatoes, and cutting turfs of peat to sell to town dwellers. It had been a hard life, but the O'Haras had been luckier than most, and had managed to feed themselves and have enough money over to educate their 2 sons at a local school. But the sad truth was that the farm could not support both boys. It was a matter of necessity that Brendan, the younger by 5 years, should get employment away from the farm.